Have you ever accused someone of something, and then found out that person was the only one trying to save you? Because this story I'm about to tell you is going to make you rethink every judgment you've ever made in your life. And I need you to pay close attention, because the ending of this story changed the way I see human beings. And I need you to stay until the very last word, because everything you're going to feel over the next few minutes is going to transform in the final sentences. Margaret had just turned 62, lived alone in a 2-bedroom apartment on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, and carried on her face that kind of beauty that time doesn't erase, it just reshapes. Silver hair cut just above the shoulders, always neatly styled. Thin wire-framed glasses. Delicate hands with raised veins, hands that had spent decades holding chalk, pens, and books. She had been an English literature professor her entire adult life. 40 years in the classroom. 40 years grading essays from teenagers who didn't want to read, lending paperbacks to students who couldn't afford to buy them, drying the tears of girls who were bullied during lunch. Margaret was one of those teachers everyone remembers. The kind who makes you fall in love with reading. The kind that, 30 years later, a former student spots in the grocery store and says, "Mrs. Bellingham, you changed my life." And she did change lives. Many of them. But she had retired 6 years ago, and in those 6 years, Margaret had been getting lonelier by the day. Her husband, Arthur, had died 11 years earlier from a massive heart attack. A Sunday morning. He was making coffee in the kitchen, something he did every Sunday, because he always said Sunday coffee has to be made slowly, with the window cracked open so you can hear the birds. Margaret was still in bed, listening to the sounds of the city waking up and the gurgling of the coffee maker. And then she heard the sound of a mug shattering on the kitchen floor. A sharp crack. Then a dull thud. Margaret jumped out of bed with her heart pounding. When she got to the kitchen, Arthur was on the floor, eyes open, with shards of ceramic around him and coffee pooling into the grout between the tiles. She screamed his name. Shook him. Called 911. But he was already gone. Just like that. No warning. No goodbye. No final "I love you." Arthur left in the middle of a Sunday morning coffee, and Margaret never heard a mug break again without feeling the ground disappear. Their only daughter, Laura, had been living in London since 2016. She'd gone to do a master's degree in art history at the Courtauld, met a British man named James, married him, had 2 kids, Oliver and Sophie, and never moved back. Not that she didn't love her mother. She did. She loved her deeply. But life kept pushing her further away, the way life does to everyone when you're not paying attention. Laura called every week, usually Sunday evenings London time. She'd send photos of the grandkids. They'd do a video call on Christmas. But actual physical presence, sitting next to each other, holding hands, smelling each other's perfume, that didn't exist anymore. So Margaret lived like this, the books piled on every horizontal surface of the apartment, the television left on more for the noise than for the picture, and the silence. That thick, heavy silence that only people who live alone understand. The silence that makes its own sound. And Gloria. Gloria was the housekeeper. She'd been working in Margaret's home for 7 years. She was 43, originally from a small town outside of Port-au-Prince, Haiti. She'd come to New York at 19 with nothing but a duffel bag and the address of a cousin in the Bronx scribbled on a scrap of paper. The cousin lived in a cramped apartment in Mott Haven. Gloria moved in with her, started working as a house cleaner, and life went on the way life goes when you're a poor, black, immigrant woman in America, slowly, hard, and with almost zero margin for error. Gloria woke up every day at 4 in the morning to catch the first subway. She walked 10 minutes to the station, took the 6 train down to 59th, transferred to the 1, and got off at 72nd Street. She arrived at Margaret's apartment at 7 o'clock sharp. Never late. In 7 years, she was never late a single day. Not when her son had an asthma attack and she spent the night in the emergency room. Not when the subway flooded and half the lines were down. Not when she herself was running a fever. 7 years. Always at 7. She was a small woman, dark-skinned, with rough hands from years of scrubbing, wringing, folding, and ironing since she was a girl. She spoke quietly. Always in a low voice, almost a whisper, as if apologizing for taking up space. But she worked hard. And she had a way of looking at Margaret that was almost maternal. It's a strange thing to say, because Gloria was 20 years younger. But there was something in her gestures, in the attention she paid to every little detail, that came from someone who genuinely cares. Not someone clocking in and clocking out. She made coffee the way Margaret liked it, strong, with just a little sugar and a drop of vanilla that nobody asked for, but that made all the difference. She left the newspaper folded on the left side of the cup, because Margaret was left-handed and liked to grab the paper with her left hand while holding the cup with her right. That kind of detail. The kind only someone who truly pays attention would notice. She knew that on Wednesday afternoons, Margaret got sadder. Quieter. More withdrawn. Because Wednesday was the day Arthur used to come home early from his accounting firm, take off his shoes at the door, so he wouldn't scuff the floors Gloria's predecessor had just mopped, and the two of them would sit on the couch and watch a movie. Any movie. The genre didn't matter. What mattered was the company. So on Wednesdays, Gloria always found an excuse to stay a little later. She'd wash the curtains that didn't need washing. She'd reorganize the pantry that was already organized. She'd wipe down a floor that was already clean. Once she even pretended the iron was broken and spent 40 minutes trying to fix it, just so Margaret wouldn't be alone before the sun went down. And Margaret liked Gloria. She genuinely liked her. But, and here I need to be very honest with you, she liked her within a limit. That invisible limit we all pretend doesn't exist, the one that separates employer from employee. The one that separates the person who owns the apartment from the person who cleans it. Margaret treated Gloria with politeness. With respect. Even with warmth sometimes. How are you today, Gloria, when she arrived in the morning? Thank you so much, when she left. But she never sat down with her for a cup of coffee as equals. Never offered her the good armchair in the living room. Never said, Gloria, tell me about your life. Tell me where you grew up. Tell me about your dreams. She knew Gloria had 2 children. She knew their names, Marcus and Isabel. But she didn't know how old they were, didn't know what school they went to, didn't know that Marcus had severe asthma and that one night Gloria nearly lost him during a crisis at 3 in the morning in a packed emergency room in the Bronx. Didn't know that Isabel was the top student in her class and dreamed, with that big, improbable dream that only poor kids dare to dream, of becoming a doctor. To Margaret, Gloria was the woman who cleaned the house. A good woman. A trustworthy woman. Hardworking. Honest. But the help. Always the help. Never Gloria in full. Never Gloria with a last name, with a history, with wounds, with hopes. And then, on a Tuesday in March, when winter was finally loosening its grip and the afternoons were getting just a little bit longer, the first strange thing happened. Margaret was looking for a gold brooch that had belonged to her mother. An antique brooch, shaped like a rose, with delicate petals crafted in gold and a small ruby in the center. It wasn't worth a fortune in market value. Maybe $2,000, $3 at most. But in terms of memory? Priceless. It was the only piece of jewelry her mother had left behind. Her mother, Dorothy, had been a seamstress her whole life. She sewed wedding dresses, gowns for galas, christening outfits. She bought that brooch with the money from one particularly expensive wedding gown she made in the 60s. Wore it her whole life. On the left side of her chest, near the heart. When she died, Margaret kept the brooch. And she stored it in a blue velvet box, inside the nightstand drawer, on the left side of the bed. Always there. Always in the same place. That Tuesday, Margaret went to the drawer to look at the brooch. She did this every now and then, especially when she missed her mother. She opened the box. Empty. The brooch wasn't there. Margaret blinked. Closed the box. Opened it again. Empty. She took the box out of the drawer. Turned it upside down. Nothing. She searched inside the drawer, behind the drawer, under the nightstand. Nothing. She went to the dresser. Opened every drawer. Nothing. Went to the closet. Turned everything inside out. Nothing. Searched the bathroom, the living room, the kitchen, the bookshelves, inside coat pockets. Nothing. The brooch had vanished. Evaporated. And the first thing Margaret thought, and she hated herself for thinking it, hated herself with every fiber of her being, but she thought it, was, could it have been Gloria? The thought came fast, involuntary, like a reflex. The kind you don't control. It arrives before reason, before morality, before decency. It comes from a dark place that exists inside everyone, a place we'd rather pretend isn't there. No, no. Impossible. 7 years working here. Nothing has ever gone missing. Nothing. Not a coin. Margaret shook her head, as if trying to physically fling the thought out of her skull, and moved on with her day. She probably put it somewhere else and forgot. Normal. 62 years old. Memory plays tricks on everyone. A week passed. 7 full days during which Margaret didn't think about it. Or rather, she did think about it, but kept pushing the thought down, like pushing clothes underwater in a basin. On Friday, Margaret went to the bank. She withdrew $800 in cash, $400 bills and $850s. Margaret liked having cash at home. Generational thing. She didn't fully trust cards, worried the machine might malfunction, and liked being able to pay the corner deli, the newsstand, the pharmacy, everything with cash. She wrote it down in a little notebook, $800 withdrawn. The notebook lived inside her purse, next to the wallet. Margaret wrote everything down in it, expenses, deposits, bill due dates. 40 years of teaching instills one thing above all else: write it down. On Saturday, she went to the grocery store. Spent $123.40. Rounded it to 123 in the notebook. On Monday, she stopped at the pharmacy. Blood pressure medication and a cream for her knee. $51. Noted. On Tuesday, she opened her wallet to set aside money for the building's maintenance fee, because yes, Margaret still paid certain things in cash, another habit from another era. And she counted the money. Counted it again. And again. It was short. 800 minus 123 minus 51 equals 626. But in the wallet there were only $380. $246 had vanished. Margaret sat on the bed with the open wallet in her hand and stared at the bills as though they might offer some explanation. $246 don't just disappear. Money doesn't evaporate. Doesn't walk out of a wallet on its own. Somebody took it. And the only person who entered that apartment besides her, the only person who had access to the purse that hung on the kitchen chair while Margaret watched television in the living room, was Gloria. Margaret's chest tightened. Because accusing someone of theft is not a small thing. It's a word that brands. That burns. That doesn't wash off. Especially accusing someone who's worked in your home for 7 years. Someone who never gave you a reason to doubt. Someone who shows up at 7 in the morning with that shy smile and says good morning as if the morning really is good. But the facts, Margaret kept repeating to herself, the facts are right there. The brooch is gone. The money is gone. And there's only one person with access. Margaret said nothing. She didn't confront. She decided to observe. And here is where the story starts to get dangerous. Because when you decide to suspect someone, the entire world shifts. Everything that person does becomes suspicious. Every gesture, every glance, every silence takes on a meaning it may not actually have. You build a narrative and then you go around collecting pieces that fit, discarding everything that doesn't confirm what you've already decided is the truth. There's a name for it in psychology, confirmation bias. But in everyday life, the name is simpler: injustice. Gloria arrived the next morning as always. 7 o'clock sharp. "Good morning, Mrs. Bellingham. How did you sleep?" Margaret answered with a smile that was half its usual size. "I'm fine, Gloria. Thank you." And she watched. Like an amateur detective. She noticed Gloria had a different phone. A phone that looked newer than the previous one, which had been an old model with a cracked screen. And she thought, where did she get the money for that phone? She noticed Gloria was wearing new sneakers. White. Clean. And she thought, I've never seen those sneakers. She noticed Gloria, while tidying the bedroom, spent an unusually long time going through the dresser drawers. Opening them, moving things around, reorganizing. And Margaret, watching from the living room doorway, thought, what is she looking for in there? Every detail became evidence. Every gesture became proof. Margaret was building a case inside her own head, playing prosecutor, judge, and jury, and all three were herself. And the most terrifying part is that the case made sense. Everything makes sense when you've already decided who's guilty. You can fit any piece into the puzzle when you already know what picture you want to see. Another week went by. Gloria came every day, worked, left. Margaret observed, mentally cataloging every supposedly strange detail, which, let's be clear, were not strange at all. They were normal. But when you look at normal through the eyes of suspicion, even breathing looks like conspiracy. And then, on Thursday, something else disappeared. A manila envelope containing $1,500 in $100 bills that Margaret had tucked inside a book on the living room shelf. It was emergency money. A rainy day fund. Margaret didn't trust banks with everything, another generational trait, and liked keeping a sum hidden somewhere in the apartment, just in case. And the place she chose to hide it was inside a book. The Great Gatsby, by F. Scott Fitzgerald. Not a first edition. A dog-eared paperback she'd bought at the Strand 30 years ago. But a book Margaret loved. And the irony of hiding money inside The Great Gatsby, a novel about appearances, about judging people based on what you think you see, about the lies we build around ourselves and around others, the irony of hiding money there and then accusing someone of stealing it, well, that irony only became clear much, much later. The envelope wasn't there. Margaret pulled Gatsby off the shelf, shook the book upside down, flipped through every page. Nothing fell out. She pulled out the books next to it. Fitzgerald, then Hemingway, then Toni Morrison. Shook them all. Nothing. And this time, Margaret didn't hesitate. There was no moment of doubt. No head shaking to chase away the thought. This time, the thought walked in and sat down. Made itself at home. In her mind, it was clear. Crystal clear. Gloria was stealing. Slowly. Carefully. Methodically. Taking a little at a time. First the brooch, a test, to see if Margaret would notice. Then the cash from the wallet, another test, smaller. And now the envelope, bolder. What was next, the television? The question is cruel, I know. But that's what Margaret thought. Margaret didn't sleep that night. She sat in her armchair in the living room, lights off, television off, in the dark, listening to the ticking of the wall clock as though each second were a countdown to an explosion she herself was about to detonate. She could simply fire Gloria. Pay her what she was owed, thank her for the years of service, give some excuse, I'm cutting costs, I'm moving, my daughter's coming back from London to take care of the house. Let her go without accusation, without a scene, without humiliation. But something inside Margaret, pride, maybe. Or bitterness. Or that almost primal human need to look into the eyes of the person who wronged you and say, I know what you did. I'm not stupid. That need, that craving for confrontation, was stronger than prudence. The next morning, when Gloria arrived at 7 o'clock sharp and opened the door with her key, because Margaret had given her a copy of the key 5 years ago, a gesture of trust that now felt like naivety, Margaret was already sitting at the kitchen table. Upright, rigid, with an expression Gloria had never seen in 7 years. An expression that didn't belong to the Mrs. Bellingham she knew. It was the face of a courtroom. Gloria sensed immediately that something was wrong. "Good morning, Mrs. Bellingham. Is everything okay?" "Gloria, sit down. I need to talk to you." The tone left no room. Gloria sat in the chair on the other side of the table. The same table where they had coffee together every morning. But that morning there was no coffee. No newspaper. No smell of vanilla. Just silence and an invisible distance that suddenly felt like miles. Margaret got straight to the point. "Gloria, things have been disappearing from this apartment. My mother's brooch is gone, money has gone missing from my wallet, and an envelope with $1,500 that I kept inside a book on the shelf is gone. Do you know anything about this?" Gloria's face collapsed. Not with anger. Not with indignation. Not with the kind of reaction you'd expect from someone falsely accused who fires back with fury. It was something worse. Much worse. It was pain. A deep, muffled pain, the kind that starts in your chest and rises up your throat and reaches your eyes and sits there, shimmering, but refusing to spill over. Gloria was too strong to cry there. She had learned to swallow tears since she was a girl. "Mrs. Bellingham," she said, her voice trembling like a guitar string tuned to its breaking point. "Are you saying you think it was me?" Margaret swallowed hard. "I'm not saying anything, Gloria. I'm asking." But the tone said something else. The tone had already judged, convicted, and sentenced. And Gloria heard what wasn't spoken. Because Gloria heard everything, including the silence. She was quiet for about 10 seconds that felt like 10 hours. The ticking of the clock was the only living thing in that kitchen. Then Gloria stood up. Slowly. She took off her apron. Folded it with care. With care, you understand? In the middle of all that, in the middle of the pain, the humiliation, the injustice, Gloria folded the apron neatly and placed it on the table. Because that was who she was. Careful even in the worst moment of her life. And she said, "Mrs. Bellingham, I've worked in this home for 7 years. 7 years. Do you know how many times I took something that wasn't mine from this apartment? 0. Not a candy. Not a paperclip. But if you suspect me, then there's nothing left for me here." And she walked out. Without slamming the door. Without screaming. Without cursing. Without crying, at least not in front of Margaret. She walked out in silence, with the dignity of someone who owes nothing and knows it. The dignity that only someone who has been knocked down by life over and over can hold upright when everything is falling apart. Margaret sat there. At the kitchen table. With the folded apron on the surface and a hollow in her chest she hadn't expected to feel. Because deep down, way deep down, in a place she didn't like to visit, Margaret knew she had no proof. None. 0. No camera footage. No witness. No catching anyone in the act. She had assumption. She had process of elimination. She had a thought that came too fast and that she didn't have the courage to question. And when you have no one left to blame, you pick whoever's easiest. And who is easier to accuse than the housekeeper? Than the poor woman? Than the black woman? Than the immigrant woman who comes from far away, rides the subway for an hour, and cleans other people's homes? Margaret knew this. She knew it. She had read Fitzgerald, that cursed Gatsby that held the envelope. She had read Toni Morrison, Beloved, The Bluest Eye, novels about the wounds that run through generations. She had spent 40 years in a classroom talking about social inequality, about systemic racism, about how American society was built on the backs of people who never received the recognition they deserved. Margaret taught about this. She assigned essays about it. She graded papers about it. She led discussions about it. But one thing is the theory, right? One thing is the eloquent lecture at the podium, the sharp quote on the exam, the passionate debate in the faculty lounge. Another thing entirely is when your mother's brooch goes missing. Then the theory goes out the window, and what's left is instinct. And Margaret's instinct, shaped by 62 years of living in this country, in this society, in this system, her instinct pointed at the housekeeper. In the days that followed, Margaret tried to carry on normally. She washed dishes herself, something she hadn't done in years. Mopped the floor. Tried to cook and burn the rice twice. She realized, with a discomfort that physically ached, how much she had depended on Gloria for the most basic things. After a week, she hired someone else. A woman named Patricia, recommended by the neighbor across the hall. Patricia was pleasant, efficient, punctual. But she wasn't Gloria. She didn't know that Wednesdays made Margaret sad. She didn't know the coffee had to be strong with little sugar and a drop of vanilla. She didn't leave the newspaper folded on the left side of the cup. She didn't stay a single minute past her hours. She arrived, she worked, she left. Professional. Correct. But cold. Without that invisible warmth Gloria left in the air. And Margaret, for the first time in 6 years of post-Arthur loneliness, missed someone who wasn't her husband and wasn't her daughter. She missed Gloria. The shy smile. The always clean apron. The way she hummed softly while ironing old Haitian songs, Creole melodies Margaret had never heard before and now, in the silence of the apartment, missed like she missed oxygen. But pride wouldn't let her call. Pride and shame. Because if Gloria was innocent, and a voice growing louder every day inside Margaret screamed that she was, then Margaret had committed something unforgivable. An injustice that can't be undone with a simple, "I'm sorry." A month passed. 30-some days of Patricia, burned rice, lonely Wednesdays, and silence. And during that month, another strange thing happened. Margaret was changing the bed sheets, something she now did herself, since Patricia only came 3 days a week, and when she lifted the mattress to tuck in the fitted sheet, she found a rolled-up sock. A plain cotton sock, white with a gray toe. And inside the sock, folded carefully, were $300 in $50 bills. Margaret froze. Standing next to the bed, sock in hand, like a statue. Because she hadn't put money there. She never hid money inside a sock under the mattress. That was something her grandmother used to do. Not Margaret. Margaret kept cash in her wallet, in the envelope inside the book, in the desk drawer. Not under a mattress. So who put it there? And more importantly, if Gloria was stealing, why would she hide the money inside the apartment? It makes no sense. None. If you steal, you take it with you. You don't stash it in the same place you stole it from. Unless nobody stole anything. Unless the person who put the money there was the same person the money belonged to. Unless that person hid it and forgot. For the first time, Margaret began to suspect someone other than Gloria. She began to suspect herself. That night, she called Laura in London. It was late in New York, even later in England, but Laura answered. "Mom? Is everything okay? Sweetheart, I need to tell you something." And she told her everything. The brooch. The wallet. The Gatsby envelope. The accusation. The folded apron on the table. Gloria walking out. Patricia who wasn't the same. And now the $300 inside a sock under the mattress. Laura listened in silence from across the ocean. Margaret could hear her daughter breathing through the phone. And when she finished, Laura asked a question Margaret didn't expect. A question that landed like a ton of bricks. "Mom, have you been forgetting other things?" Silence. A heavy silence, the kind that has texture. Because yes, she had been forgetting. In the past few weeks, she had left the stove on twice. Once the flame burned for 3 hours until she smelled something acrid. It was the rubber handle of a spoon that had fallen against the burner. She had forgotten the name of her neighbor on the 3rd floor, Helen, whom she'd known for 12 years. Looked her right in the face in the elevator and the name simply wasn't there. Had to fake it. She'd gone to the store to buy milk and come back with a full bag of groceries, but no milk. She'd gotten the day of the week wrong 3 times in the same month. She'd called Patricia, Gloria. Twice. But that's normal, isn't it? 62 years old. Everyone forgets. Everyone has those moments. Laura didn't agree. Mom, I want you to see a doctor. A neurologist. Please. Margaret resisted. A neurologist? That's an overreaction, sweetheart. I'm just a little distracted. Stress, loneliness, these things happen. But Laura didn't give up. She called the next day. Mom, did you make the appointment? And the day after. Mom, please. And the day after that. Until Margaret, more to make her daughter stop insisting than because she believed it was necessary, made an appointment. Dr. Henry Park. Office on the Upper East Side, 78th Street near Lexington. A neurologist in his mid-60s, silver hair, round tortoiseshell glasses, and a way of speaking so slowly that Margaret, accustomed to the pace of New York, had to stop herself from finishing his sentences. But Dr. Park was slow on purpose. He spoke slowly because he listened even more slowly. He listened to every word, every pause, every hesitation. He listened to what was said and what wasn't. Margaret sat in the office, in the leather chairs that creaked when you shifted, and told him what was happening. The forgetfulness. The things that disappeared and reappeared in strange places. The confusion with names and dates. She tried to minimize it. Oh, doctor, it's just an age thing, we all slow down. But Dr. Park didn't minimize. He asked questions. Many questions. About routine, about sleep, about diet, about medications, about family history. He asked if Margaret's mother had had memory problems. Margaret hesitated. Then said, "My mother died at 78. In her last years, yes, she got confused quite a bit. We assumed it was just old age." Dr. Park wrote it down. He ordered tests. An MRI of the brain. Comprehensive blood work, including markers Margaret had never heard of. And a neuropsychological evaluation, a battery of memory tests, reasoning tasks, spatial and temporal orientation assessments that lasted nearly 4 hours and left Margaret exhausted and frightened, because she noticed, during the tests, that she was getting things wrong that she shouldn't have been getting wrong. Margaret completed everything within 2 weeks. She returned to the office to get the results on a Thursday afternoon, her heart in her throat and her palms damp. Dr. Park was sitting behind his desk. The test results were in a beige folder in front of him. He took off his glasses, rubbed his eyes with his thumb and forefinger, that universal gesture doctors make when they need a second before speaking, put the glasses back on, looked at Margaret with a gentleness she would never forget, for as long as she could still remember, and said, "Mrs. Bellingham, your results indicate early-stage Alzheimer's disease." The world stopped. It's not a metaphor. It's not a literary device. The world stopped. Sound vanished. The light changed. The office shrank. Margaret heard the word Alzheimer's and felt as though someone were pulling the ground out from under her, slowly, inch by inch, until there was nothing left to stand on. Alzheimer's. The disease that erases. The disease that steals, and oh, the irony, the wretched, vicious irony. The disease that steals. It doesn't steal brooches. It doesn't steal money. It doesn't steal envelopes. It steals memory. It steals names. It steals faces. It steals stories. It steals identity. It steals you from yourself, from the inside out, slowly, until there's nothing left. Margaret was silent for so long that Dr. Park leaned forward and asked softly, Mrs. Bellingham? Are you hearing me? I am. Yes, doctor. I'm hearing you. And suddenly, like a camera flash, like a bolt of lightning that tears open a dark sky and illuminates everything in a split second of brutal clarity, Margaret understood. Understood everything. The brooch wasn't stolen. She put it somewhere else and forgot. The wallet money didn't vanish. She spent it on something and doesn't remember. The envelope inside Gatsby, she herself took it out. Probably during one of those moments of confusion, those short circuits the brain was starting to have. She grabbed the envelope, put it somewhere else, and 5 minutes later had no memory of doing it. The $300 in the sock under the mattress? That was her. Hiding things in random spots, the way people in the early stages of Alzheimer's frequently do. Because when the brain starts to malfunction, it doesn't stop working, it works wrong. It creates alternative routes, invents filing systems that make no sense, hides treasures in places it can never find again. It wasn't Gloria. It was never Gloria. It was the disease. The disease Margaret didn't even know she had. And Gloria? Gloria walked out of that apartment carrying on her back an accusation that wasn't hers. Her dignity torn apart. Her heart shattered into pieces so small no glue on earth could put them back together. Because for Gloria, that accusation wasn't just about losing a job. You can find another job, hard, painful, but you can. What you can't easily find again is destroyed trust. It's hearing someone you dedicated 7 years of your life to tell you, in that tone of voice, that you're a thief. Gloria loved Margaret. Yes, loved her. In her own way. In that quiet, discreet, nearly invisible way. The way people who care for others love, without fanfare, without expectations, without asking for recognition in return. She loved because it was in her nature to love whoever she cared for. She couldn't separate the two. Margaret left Dr. Park's office that Thursday afternoon and took a cab back to the Upper West Side. She went up to the apartment. Sat in the armchair in the living room. The same armchair where she'd stayed up all night planning the confrontation with Gloria. And she cried. Cried the way she hadn't cried since the day Arthur collapsed in the kitchen with ceramic shards around him. She cried from fear, because Alzheimer's is terrifying. She cried from grief, because she knew, with the cruel precision of someone who had read about the disease, what lay ahead. But above all, she cried from shame. A shame that burned inside her like acid. Because she had looked into the eyes of an innocent woman and made her feel like a criminal. Because she had 40 years' worth of Fitzgerald and Morrison on her shelves and hadn't learned the most basic lesson from any of them, that suspicion destroys more than betrayal. That night she called Laura. Sweetheart, the diagnosis came back. And she told her everything, the Alzheimer's, the connection to the missing items, the certainty that Gloria hadn't stolen a thing. And at the end, she said the most important thing, sweetheart, I need to find Gloria. I need to ask for her forgiveness. Laura, from the other side of the ocean, her voice breaking, said, Mom, I'm going to help you. But finding Gloria wasn't simple. The old phone number was disconnected, Gloria had changed numbers. Which is common. People working paycheck to paycheck switch carriers often, chasing cheaper plans, because the old plan expires, because the phone gets stolen. Margaret knew Gloria lived in the Bronx, but she didn't know the exact address. And here is a detail that seems small but is enormous. 7 years. 7 years of near-daily contact, Monday through Friday, 7 to 4. More time together than many married couples spend. And Margaret didn't know where Gloria lived. Didn't know the neighborhood. Didn't know if it was a house or an apartment. Didn't know if there was a yard. Didn't know if the street was quiet or loud. Didn't know if Gloria shared the place with anyone. Because she never asked. In 7 years, she never once said, Gloria, where is your home? What's it like? Because Gloria was the woman who cleaned the house. And the woman who cleans the house, she doesn't have a house. Not in the employer's imagination. She doesn't have an address, a neighborhood, a community. She doesn't have a life outside of work. She exists inside the employer's apartment, from 7 to 4, Monday through Friday. Outside of that, she vanishes. Evaporates. As though she doesn't exist. Margaret felt another layer of shame, different from the first. This one was worse. Because the accusation was an act. A specific, terrible mistake, but a single act. The indifference, though, the indifference was chronic. It was 7 years of not asking. Of not caring. Of living alongside someone without knowing them. Of having Gloria so close yet so far away at the same time. Margaret went down to the lobby and asked Gerald, the doorman who'd worked there for 20 years, if there was any record of Gloria in the building's domestic worker log. Gerald went to the file cabinet, pulled out a dusty folder, and found an old entry card with an ID number and an address, a street in Mott Haven, the Bronx. Apartment 4B. Margaret wrote it down on a piece of paper with a shaking hand. And the next day, she did something she hadn't done in a long time. She left the Upper West Side. She walked to the subway, because she didn't know how to get to the Bronx by bus and had never tried. She took the 1 train to the 6 and rode it all the way up. And for the first time in her life, she made a journey Gloria had made twice a day, 5 days a week, for 7 years. And the ride was long. More than an hour each way. Rattling cars, stale air, the hum of the rails. And Margaret, sitting in that hard plastic seat, thought, Gloria does this every day. Every single day. And I never once asked her if she was tired when she arrived. She got to Mott Haven. Walked out of the station into a neighborhood that looked nothing like the Upper West Side. Walk-up buildings with fire escapes zigzagging down their facades. Bodegas on every corner. Kids on bikes weaving between parked cars. Dominican music drifting from an open window. The thick, complicated, beautiful chaos of a neighborhood that's full of life but short on resources. She found the building. Walked up to the 4th floor because the elevator was broken, and wondered how many times Gloria had walked these same stairs at 5 in the morning with her knees aching after a day of scrubbing floors. She knocked on the door of apartment 4B. 3 knocks. A girl opened it. 13 years old, big dark eyes, hair pulled back in a ponytail, wearing a public school t-shirt. The girl looked at Margaret with curiosity and a touch of suspicion, because nobody in that building got visits from silver-haired women in cashmere scarves. Can I help you? I'm looking for Gloria. She's my mom. And she turned inside, Mom. There's a lady here. And when Gloria appeared at the door, drying her hands on a dish towel, Margaret barely recognized her. Not because Gloria had changed physically. It had only been a little over a month. But her eyes were different. The light that had always been there, that gentle light of someone who cares, who watches over, who pays attention, was gone. Gloria looked at Margaret and stood frozen in the doorway. She didn't say good morning. She didn't smile. She didn't invite her in. Mrs. Bellingham? What are you doing here? Margaret opened her mouth. She'd rehearsed an entire speech on the subway. She'd prepared sentences, arguments, explanations. But standing there, in that Bronx hallway, looking at Gloria with that extinguished look, she forgot everything. Maybe the Alzheimer's. Maybe the emotion. Maybe both. She could only manage 3 words. 3 words that weighed more than any rehearsed speech. Forgive me, Gloria. Gloria didn't respond. She looked at Margaret for a long time. Long enough for Isabel, the daughter, to come back to the door to check if everything was okay. And then Gloria did something Margaret didn't expect. She opened the door wider and said, in a flat voice, "Come in." The apartment was exactly what it looked like from outside. Small. 2 tight bedrooms, a living room that doubled as a kitchen, a bathroom with a plastic shower curtain. But everything was clean. Immaculately clean and organized. Because Gloria was like that everywhere, not just in other people's apartments. There was a two-seat couch covered with a floral throw, an old television, one of those heavy ones from a decade ago, on a small stand, and on the wall, a framed picture of the Virgin Mary with a dried palm cross tucked behind it. Margaret sat on the couch. Gloria sat in the chair by the table, a small folding table with mismatched chairs. Isabel stood in the bedroom doorway, watching with those enormous eyes. Margaret told her everything. From the beginning. Without sparing herself. She told her about the increasing forgetfulness. About the stove left on. About the neighbor's name vanishing from her brain. About the appointment with Dr. Park. About the diagnosis. Early-stage Alzheimer's. And then she connected the dots. The brooch wasn't stolen, the money didn't disappear, the envelope wasn't taken by anyone, it was her. The disease. The confused brain hiding things in absurd spots and then erasing the record. And that she had accused Gloria unjustly. Without proof. Without grounds. Without basic human decency. And that she was here to beg forgiveness. As she spoke, Margaret cried. Not dramatically, not with heaving sobs and gasping. Quietly, in a contained, almost ashamed way. Tears rolling down her aged face, one after another, steady and relentless. Gloria listened to everything in silence. And when Margaret finished, sniffling, wiping her face with the back of her hand, Gloria said something that knocked the ground out from under Margaret for the second time. Mrs. Bellingham. I already knew. The air left Margaret's lungs as though someone had punched her. What do you mean, you knew? Gloria took a deep breath. Looked at the wall, at the Virgin Mary in the frame, as though asking for permission or courage, and began to speak. I knew you were forgetting things. It's been going on for a while. About 2 years, more or less. You started losing your keys. At first it was once a week, then it was every day. I'd find them in places that made no sense, inside the pot cabinet, in the sock drawer, once inside the microwave. Then you started forgetting whether you'd taken your blood pressure medication. I started putting the pills into little plastic cups with the day of the week written on them, and I'd check every morning when I arrived to see if you'd taken them. One day you called me Laura. You looked at me and said, "Sweetheart, I'm so glad you came back from London." I didn't correct you. I just smiled and said, "Yes, Mom, I'm here." Because in that moment, correcting you would have been worse than pretending. And another time you asked me if Arthur had already left for work. And Arthur had been dead for 9 years by then. Margaret felt the blood freeze in her veins. Hearing this was like hearing someone describe a car crash you caused while sleepwalking. The destruction was real. And you didn't even know it was happening. Gloria continued. Her voice steady, but her eyes glistening. I didn't say anything because it wasn't my place, Mrs. Bellingham. I'm the housekeeper. Who am I to walk up to you and say, "Ma'am, I think you're getting sick"? You wouldn't have accepted hearing that from me. You'd have thought I was being presumptuous. That I was overstepping. So I kept quiet. But I didn't stay still. I started writing down your medications in a little notebook and checking every day. I started leaving notes near the stove, "Mrs. Bellingham, don't forget to turn it off." I started keeping things in the same place every time, the keys on the hook, the glasses on the side table, the remote on the arm of the chair, so you'd have fixed landmarks and wouldn't get lost. I started coming in earlier when I could and staying later when I sensed it had been a bad day. Margaret was in shock. She remembered the notes. She'd thought it was just Gloria being fussy. Overly organized. Obsessive about tidiness. She never, at any point, imagined it was a silent protection strategy. Never imagined that for 2 years, Gloria had been monitoring the deterioration of her employer's mind without saying a single word. And Gloria wasn't finished. Your mother's brooch, Mrs. Bellingham. I found it inside the sugar canister in the kitchen about 2 weeks before you noticed it was missing. You must have put it there during a confused moment. I took it out, cleaned it carefully, because I know how much that brooch means to you, put it in a small velvet pouch and placed it in the nightstand drawer. But then you must have gone through the drawer later and moved it again. And I was afraid to say something. Afraid you'd think I was making it up. Or worse, afraid you'd think I had taken it and was returning it with an excuse. And the envelope? The $1,500 inside Gatsby? Gloria lowered her eyes and spoke more quietly. That envelope? I saw you take it out of the book one afternoon. You sat in the armchair in the living room, opened the envelope, counted the money slowly, set some bills aside, I don't know what for, and put the rest inside the pillowcase on your bed. I saw it from the kitchen doorway. And I thought, she's going to forget she put it there. And you did. Inside the pillowcase. Margaret never would have looked there. Never. Gloria had been, this entire time, not stealing. She had been tracking. Tracking the confused footsteps of a mind that was unraveling. Watching in silence. Protecting without being asked. Doing the work of a specialized caregiver on a housekeeper's salary. And when Margaret accused her of theft, Gloria didn't defend herself with this information. She didn't throw it in her face. She didn't say, Mrs. Bellingham, the brooch was in the sugar canister, the money was in the pillowcase, you're the one who's losing your mind. She didn't say that. She didn't use the disease as a weapon of self-defense. Because to Gloria, doing that would have been too cruel. It would have destroyed Margaret with a truth she wasn't ready to hear. It would have stripped her of the last thing she still had intact in that moment, the belief that her mind was working fine. Gloria chose to leave. She chose to carry the injustice, to be called a thief, to be sent away like a criminal, rather than destroy the dignity of a woman she loved. Think about that. Stop everything you're doing and think about that for a second. A woman earning minimum wage. Who wakes up at 4 in the morning? Who rides the subway for an hour? Who cleans other people's homes? This woman chose to protect the dignity of the person who was accusing her of being a thief. Not out of duty. Not out of obligation. Not out of fear of losing her job, she was already losing it. She chose because she loved. Because caring, for Gloria, wasn't a profession. It was identity. It was who she was down to the bone. Margaret lost all composure. She felt her legs weaken beneath her and grabbed the arm of the couch. Gloria, she said, her voice shattered, why didn't you tell me I was sick? Because it wasn't my place, Mrs. Bellingham. You wouldn't have believed it. Not coming from me. And Margaret knew, with a bitter and irrefutable certainty, that Gloria was right. If Gloria had said, Mrs. Bellingham, I think you need to see a doctor, I think you're forgetting too much, Margaret would have answered, that's absurd, Gloria, I'm perfectly fine, thank you very much. Thank you for the concern but please focus on your work. She would have dismissed it. Because the warning came from the housekeeper. And the housekeeper, in the invisible hierarchy Margaret carried inside her, even without admitting it, even as a literature professor, even having read all the right books, the housekeeper didn't have the authority to diagnose anything. The housekeeper cleans the house. She doesn't fix anyone's mind. Margaret stayed in that small apartment in the Bronx for 3 hours. And in those 3 hours, she learned more about Gloria than she had in 7 years of daily contact on the Upper West Side. She met Marcus, the 17-year-old son. Tall, thin, with a wide smile and a firm handshake. He worked part-time at a bakery to help at home. Had severe asthma, used an inhaler, and on bad nights, Gloria would sit on the edge of his bed until morning, listening to his breathing, ready to rush to the hospital if needed. She met Isabel properly, no longer the girl peeking from the doorway, but an articulate, sharp, fast-talking young woman with determined eyes. Top of her class at the public school. She wanted to be a doctor. Not just any doctor, she wanted to be a neurologist. To take care of people who lose their memories. Margaret swallowed hard when she heard that. She learned that Gloria's husband had left when Isabel was 2. That she raised both children alone, with no child support, no help, no safety net. That she cut her own hair with kitchen scissors to save money on the salon. That the biggest indulgence of the month was buying a package of shortbread cookies when she got paid. That she had never been to the movies. Never. In 43 years of life. She learned that the new phone Margaret had seen, the one that made her suspicion grow, was a used phone Marcus bought with 3 months of savings from his bakery wages and gave to his mother for her birthday. And the white sneakers? A donation from a clothing drive at the church Gloria attended on Sundays. Every crumb of suspicion Margaret had collected in her head, every piece of the accusation puzzle, had a simple, mundane, innocent explanation. An explanation she would have found in 2 minutes if she'd done something radical and revolutionary called asking. But she didn't ask. She chose to accuse. And there, in that Bronx apartment, with the smell of rice and beans cooking on the stove and the muffled sound of a television from the kids' room, Margaret had the most painful and most important revelation of her entire life. And the revelation wasn't the Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's was a disease. Terrible, yes. Devastating, yes. Progressive, irreversible, cruel. But it was a disease. Something that happened to her. The revelation was about something she did. About who she chose to be when she was tested. Margaret realized she had spent 62 years believing she was a good person. A dedicated teacher. An intellectual. A woman who read the right books, who defended the right causes, who said the right words at the right times. But when life tested that for real, not in a classroom, not in a newspaper column, not in a debate among cultured friends on the Upper West Side, but in practice, in the small moments, in the day-to-day, she failed. Because being a good person isn't about what you read. It's not about what you say. It's not about the diplomas on the wall or the books on the shelf. It's about what you do when a brooch goes missing. It's about who you point the finger at when things go wrong. It's about who you choose to believe and who you choose to suspect. That was already a lot. Gloria's bar had been set so low that the bare minimum Margaret offered already looked like generosity. And that is, at once, the saddest and the most beautiful thing about this story. Sad because it shows how little this woman received her whole life. Beautiful because it shows that even receiving so little, she gave everything. Before flying back to London, Laura did something important. She sat down with a lawyer and with Gloria, and they drew up a power of attorney. Gloria became the person legally responsible for Margaret's care. Not as a hired nurse. Not as a professional caregiver with certifications and invoices. But as the family's person of trust. The person the family chose to stay when the family couldn't. The woman Margaret had accused of being a thief was now the guardian of her life. If that's not the definition of redemption, I don't know what is. Time passed. Months became seasons. And the disease did what the disease does, it advanced. Margaret lost pieces of herself. First the names, of neighbors, of former students, of characters in the books she loved. Then the dates, she no longer knew the year, the month, sometimes not even the day. Then the faces, she'd look at a photo of Arthur and not recognize him. She'd see Laura on the phone screen and ask, "Who's that pretty young woman?" Laura would cry on the other end. But Gloria held the line. "That's your daughter, Mrs. Bellingham. Laura. She lives in London. She has 2 beautiful kids. Oh, how lovely. She looks nice. She is. Very nice. She takes after you." There were nights when Margaret woke up screaming at 3 in the morning, not knowing where she was, not knowing who she was, terrified of everything, like a child lost in a dark place. And Gloria would get up from the guest room, turn on the hallway light slowly so as not to startle her, walk to the bedroom, sit on the edge of the bed, take Margaret's hand, and say in the softest voice in the world, "It's okay, Mrs. Bellingham. You're home. I'm right here. You can sleep. It's okay. I'm here." And Margaret would calm down. Because Gloria's voice was the last thing that still made sense in that brain that was shutting down. Everything else was fading, like photographs left in the sun, the colors bleaching, the edges dissolving, until it was all white. But Gloria's voice persisted. Because it wasn't stored in memory, memory was what was being destroyed. It was stored in the body. In the hands that held hers every night. In the smell of strong coffee. In the gentle touch on her hair. In the Creole lullaby hummed softly in the dark. The disease could erase everything. But it couldn't erase what was felt. On one of Margaret's last fully lucid days, and those days had become so rare that each one was treated like a gift, Margaret looked at Gloria in the morning and said, with a clarity that surprised them both, "Gloria, I spent my entire life reading books to learn about life. 40 years teaching literature. 40 years explaining what the great writers meant. But the greatest lesson I ever received came from you." Gloria smiled, a little embarrassed, the way she always got when anyone paid her a compliment. "What lesson, Mrs. Bellingham?" "That real love has no pride. No title. No diploma on the wall. Real love shows up before dawn, rides the subway for an hour, and stays." Gloria lowered her head and cried. Not from sadness. From being seen. Finally, after everything, being seen. Not as the housekeeper. Not as the help. Not as the suspect. Not as the charity case. But as Gloria. Whole. With a name, a last name, a history, children, dreams, fears, and a heart the size of a continent. Now I need to tell you the part that's going to wreck you. And I apologize in advance. Remember Isabel? The girl with the big eyes? The one peeking from the bedroom door? The one who wanted to be a doctor? Isabel studied. With the prep course money Laura sent from London. With the tutoring sessions over video. With the determination of someone who knows this is the only shot. The only one. Because a girl from the Bronx, daughter of a housekeeper, raised without a father, with no inheritance, no financial cushion, no plan B, that girl doesn't get a second chance. She either makes it now, or the door closes. Isabel studied 6, 8, 10, 12 hours a day. Weekends, holidays, Christmas. While her friends posted vacation photos, Isabel had her face in the books. While her brother went to the bakery before dawn, Isabel was already up studying. And 2 years after the day Margaret went to the Bronx to ask for forgiveness, Isabel took the MCAT. Scored in the 98th percentile. Applied to medical school. And got accepted. Full scholarship. A girl from Mott Haven in the Bronx, who studied her entire life in public schools, who never had a private tutor growing up, who never set foot in a lab, who prepped for the biggest exam of her life with money wired from London by a woman she'd never met in person, that girl got into medical school. She got in. When the acceptance letter arrived, in an email, the way everything arrives now, Gloria was awake. She was always awake, because she slept with one ear tuned to Margaret in the next room. Isabel called, screaming. "Mom! Mom, I got in. I got into med school." And Gloria didn't scream back. Didn't jump. Didn't make a scene. She sat on the edge of the guest room bed, phone pressed to her ear, and cried in silence. Because Gloria cried the way she lived, quietly, without bothering anyone. Then she wiped her face, got up, and went to Margaret's room. Margaret was sleeping. Eyes closed, breathing slow, face peaceful. Gloria sat on the edge of the bed, took her hand, that hand that had once pointed a finger in accusation, and later held hers begging for forgiveness, and whispered, "Mrs. Bellingham, Isabel got into medical school. My daughter is going to be a doctor." Margaret didn't open her eyes. Didn't respond. No one knows if she heard. The disease had already taken almost everything. But Gloria swears on the Virgin Mary, that in that moment, Margaret squeezed her hand. A tiny squeeze. Faint. Almost imperceptible. But a squeeze. As if somewhere in there, behind all the layers of forgetting, behind all the fog, a particle of Margaret, the Margaret who was a teacher, the Margaret who loved watching students succeed, the Margaret who believed in the power of education, had heard. And had smiled from the inside. Isabel started medical school. And on her first day, when she put on the white coat for the first time, she pinned to the left side of her chest, near her heart, an antique brooch shaped like a rose, with delicate petals crafted in gold and a small ruby in the center. Margaret's mother's brooch. The brooch that started everything. Laura had found it months earlier, inside a cookie tin in the back of the kitchen cabinet. Another hiding place created by Margaret's wandering mind. And instead of locking it in a box or a safe, Laura gave it to Isabel. Because she felt her mother would have wanted it that way. That this brooch, which for generations had represented the strength of women who worked with their hands to build something, Dorothy sewing wedding dresses, Margaret grading essays, and now Gloria caring for someone who could no longer care for herself, that this brooch should now live on the chest of a new generation. A generation that would heal, not with the hands of a seamstress or a teacher, but with the hands of a doctor. Two families that, in the end, became one. Margaret passed on a Saturday morning in October. Peacefully. In her sleep. With Gloria's hand holding hers. Gloria was sitting in the chair beside the bed, a chair that had practically become an extension of her own body over the final months. And when she realized Margaret's breathing had stopped, that her chest wasn't rising anymore, that her hand had gone limp, Gloria didn't scream. Didn't call anyone. She stayed. Holding the hand. For over an hour. In silence. Because she wanted to make sure that wherever Margaret was going, she wouldn't go alone. At least not for the first steps. At the memorial service, in a small chapel on the Upper West Side with wooden pews and light filtering through stained glass, Laura read a letter. A letter Margaret had written in the early days of the disease, when she was still lucid, with instructions for when she was gone. Instructions about the apartment, about the books, about bills, about practical matters. But in the middle of the letter, in a paragraph Laura could barely get through because her voice kept breaking, there was this about Gloria: if anyone ever asks me what the most extraordinary thing in my life was, I won't say it was earning my degree. I won't say it was marrying Arthur, though that was my greatest joy. I won't say it was having Laura, who is my pride. The most extraordinary thing in my life was discovering I was wrong about someone. Because on the day I discovered Gloria hadn't stolen from me, on the day I discovered she had actually been protecting me in silence, I finally understood something that 40 years in a classroom and an entire bookshelf of literature never taught me. I understood that we don't truly see the people who take care of us. I understood that the deepest kindness is the one that has no voice. And I understood that the greatest theft there is has nothing to do with money or jewelry. It's the theft of someone's dignity because of a prejudice we carry inside us and don't even have the courage to admit is there. Gloria gave me back everything I didn't know I had lost. Not the brooch. Not the money. She gave me back the chance to be a better person in my final years. And I hope, I pray, that somehow I managed to do the same for her. The chapel went silent. The kind of silence that's louder than any applause. Isabel, sitting in the front pew, her white medical school coat over her black mourning clothes and the ruby brooch gleaming on her chest, was holding her mother's hand. Just as Gloria had held Margaret's. Hand linked to hand linked to hand. A chain that doesn't break. And Gloria wasn't crying. She was smiling. That same shy smile as always. Small, almost hidden, as if apologizing for existing. But it was there. Because Gloria knew something no one else in that chapel knew. She knew that Margaret, the woman who once looked her in the eye and treated her like a thief, had become, in the end, the person who saw her most clearly. Who believed in her most fully. Who invested in her family most deeply. And that forgiveness isn't an event. It's not a dramatic moment, with swelling music and an embrace in slow motion. Forgiveness is a decision you make every morning when you wake up. Every day, Gloria chose to forgive. Every day, Gloria chose to come back. Every day, Gloria chose to care for someone who once didn't care for her. And every day, Margaret, while she could, while her mind still allowed, chose to be a little bit better than she was the day before. That's the end of the story. But before you go, I want to ask you something. Do you have a Gloria in your life? Someone who takes care of you in silence, someone you've never really stopped to see? Someone whose name you know but whose full story you never bothered to ask about? Someone who's there every day, making your coffee the way you like it, and you don't even notice because they've become part of the scenery? Because if you do, I'm asking you one thing. Just one. Don't wait for an Alzheimer's diagnosis to wake up. Don't wait to lose someone before you appreciate them. Don't wait for the brooch to vanish before you realize that the greatest treasure in your home isn't in the drawer, isn't in the book, isn't in the hidden envelope. It's in the person who folds the apron with care even when they've just been accused of the worst. It's in the person who stays late on Wednesdays without anyone asking. It's in the person who writes down the medications you need to take and checks every day to make sure you took them. She thought the housekeeper had robbed her. But what the housekeeper did was something so extraordinary that no safe in the world would be big enough to hold it. Because she kept what no amount of money can buy. She kept the life of someone who could no longer keep her own. And she did it with love. The kind that doesn't show up in photos. The kind that doesn't become a post. The kind that never gets applause. The kind that shows up before dawn. On the subway. And stays.